The city of Silverstream was a place of quiet wonders. Its canals reflected the crisp blue sky, and the scent of baking bread and river water mingled in the air. In a tall, narrow house overlooking the oldest of these canals lived Elara, an apprentice to the city's greatest mapmaker, Master Valerius. The workshop was Elara's universe. It smelled of old paper, sharp ink, and the faint, sweet aroma of the gum Arabic used to bind pigments. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, streamed through a large circular window, illuminating rolls of parchment and vellum stacked high in every corner. For Elara, each map was a world waiting to be explored. She could spend hours tracing the delicate lines of a coastline with her finger, imagining the crash of waves and the cries of gulls. She knew the names of mountain ranges she had never seen, and deserts she had never felt the heat of. Master Valerius was a kind man with eyes that held the wisdom of 100 journeys and hands that, despite their age, were as steady as a surgeon's. He taught Elara that a map was a conversation between the traveler and the world. "You must listen to the land, my dear," he would often say, his voice a gentle rasp. "It tells you its secrets through the curve of a river, the shadow of a mountain, the silence of a valley." One rainy afternoon, as the sky wept against the workshop's window, Valerius called Elara to his main desk. He looked unusually solemn, the lines on his forehead deeper than she had ever seen them. He pushed a small velvet pouch across the polished oak surface. "I have something for you to keep, Elara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Guard it with your life. Trust no one with it. Now." Elara's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the pouch. Inside was a compass, but unlike any she had ever seen. It was not made of brass or bronze, but of a dark, polished wood that seemed to drink the light. The needle was not steel, but a sliver of what looked like obsidian, and instead of the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, the face was marked with intricate, unfamiliar symbols. "It is beautiful, master. But what is it?" Valerius looked over his shoulder, towards the door, as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. "It is a tool of great power, and therefore great danger. It does not point north. It points to the heart's desire." "Noon? Elara stared at him, confused. "Desire? Hold it," he instructed, "and think of something you want. Something simple." "No." Elara clutched the compass. Its surface was warm, almost alive. She thought of the sweet honey cakes from the bakery down the lane, her favorite treat. As the thought formed in her mind, the obsidian needle quivered, then spun, finally settling to point directly towards the workshop door and the street beyond. She gasped. "It works. Too well," Valerius said grimly. He took the compass back and closed her fingers around it. "The desire it shows you is a siren's song, Elara. The more you follow it, the more you lose your own path. It promises you everything but takes away the most important thing, yourself. I took it from a man who wished to misuse it, and I fear he will come looking for it. If anything should happen to me, take it and run. Go north to the Frost Peak Citadel. Give it to the librarians there. They will know how to destroy it." "Now?" The gravity in his voice chilled her more than the autumn rain. She nodded, placing the heavy compass into a hidden pocket inside her tunic. It felt like a stone against her heart. That night, Elara's sleep was dreamless and heavy. She was awoken not by the morning sun, but by a splintering crash from downstairs. Her heart leaped into her throat. She crept to the door of her small attic room and listened. She heard heavy footsteps, the sound of parchment being torn, and a cold, cruel voice that did not belong in their peaceful workshop. "Where is it, old man?" "The Wayfinder." "I know you have it." "Neol." She heard Master Valerius' voice strained with pain. "I don't know what you're talking about." A sickening thud followed, and Valerius cried out. Panic seized Elara. She remembered her master's words. If anything should happen to me, take it and run. Peeking through a crack in the floorboards, she saw a tall figure in a dark hooded robe standing over her master. The man's face was hidden in shadow, but his hands were long and pale, like spiders. Magical energy, a sickly green, crackled around his fingertips. He was searching, tossing aside priceless maps as if they were trash. Elara knew she couldn't fight him. With tears streaming down her face, she grabbed her satchel, stuffing in a spare map of the kingdom, a water skin, and a small loaf of bread. Her hands closed around the velvet pouch in her pocket. She opened her window, which faced a narrow alleyway. It was a risky jump, but it was her only chance. She landed hard on the slick cobblestones below, her ankles screaming in protest. She didn't dare look back. She scrambled to her feet and ran, ignoring the pain. The cold voice echoed in her mind, and the image of her master, helpless on the floor, was burned into her memory. She ran through the sleeping streets of Silverstream, a lone, desperate figure disappearing into the pre-dawn mist. The city she loved now felt like a cage, and her only guide was the cursed compass pressed against her heart. For 3 days, Elara walked, her grief a heavy cloak. She followed the main road north, hiding in ditches or thickets of trees whenever a cart or rider approached. The pain in her ankle had subsided to a dull ache, but the pain in her heart was a raw, open wound. She was alone, terrified, and hunted. She knew she couldn't make the journey to the Frostpeak Citadel by herself. The path led through the Glimmerwood forest, a place of dangerous beasts and even more dangerous legends, and then across the treacherous Dragon's Tooth Mountains. She was a mapmaker, not a warrior. She needed help. Her kingdom map showed a town called Barrows Deep, a day's journey ahead. It was a rough frontier settlement known for attracting sellswords, bounty hunters, and other people who lived by the blade. It was there she would have to find an escort. Barrows Deep was as grim as its name suggested. Buildings were made of dark, rough-hewn timber, and the air was thick with the smoke of coal fires and the smell of cheap ale. The town's tavern, the Rusty Axe, was easy to find. It was the loudest building on the main street. Pushing open the heavy door, Elara was met with a wall of noise, drunken laughter, angry shouts, and the off-key singing of a man with a lute. The air was stale and suffocating. Men with scarred faces and hard eyes turned to stare at the young woman who had just entered their den. She pulled her hood lower and scanned the room, looking for someone who seemed less like a bandit and more like a professional. Her eyes landed on a man sitting alone in a dark corner. He was cleaning a long, curved dagger with a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape sound a small island of order in the tavern's chaos. He was broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and a short, dark beard threaded with gray. His eyes, when they briefly flickered up to meet hers, were the color of slate and held no warmth. He looked capable, and more importantly, he looked sober. Taking a deep breath, Elara walked over to his table. "Are you a sellsword?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He didn't stop sharpening his blade. "Sometimes. Depends on the job. Depends on the pay." "Nay, Nirwal. I need to get to the Frostpeak Citadel," she said. "I need an escort through the Glimmerwood and the Dragon's Tooth Mountains." He finally stopped and looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "That's a long, dangerous road. It'll cost you." "No way." "I have money," she lied, her hand tightening on the few silver coins in her pouch. It was barely enough to buy food for a week. She had one thing of value, her mother's silver locket. It was her most prized possession. With a heavy heart, she pulled it from beneath her tunic and placed it on the table. "This is the deposit. I can pay you the rest when we arrive." "Nay, I don't." The man picked up the locket. He studied the intricate design for a moment before looking back at her. The Citadel is home to scholars, not merchants. What's a girl like you want there? I'm delivering a message, she said quickly. His gaze was unnervingly sharp, as if he could see through her flimsy excuses. A very important message to go all that way. He sighed, a sound of pure world weariness. The name's Kaelen. Be at the North Gate at sunrise. And don't be late. I don't like to wait. Nah, one. He pocketed the locket and returned to his dagger, the conversation clearly over. Elara felt a small surge of relief. He had agreed. As she turned to leave, she realized she had another problem. She had no money for a room or food. The thought of her master's fate, her hunger, and her fear overwhelmed her. She felt a desperate urge, a need for safety and comfort. Unconsciously, her hand went to the compass in her pocket. She pulled it out, shielding it from view. I just want a safe place to sleep tonight, she thought, her desire a silent prayer. The obsidian needle spun wildly, then settled, pointing towards a dark alley beside the tavern. Hesitantly, she followed its direction. In the alley, tucked behind some barrels, was the entrance to a stable. The air inside was warm and smelled of hay and animals. In an empty stall there was a pile of clean, dry straw. It wasn't an inn, but it was warm, dry, and hidden. Grateful, she burrowed into the straw and fell into an exhausted sleep. But as she drifted off, a strange feeling washed over her. It was a subtle emptiness, like a word on the tip of her tongue that she couldn't quite remember. She dismissed it as exhaustion, unaware that the compass had just taken its first, tiny payment. They set out at dawn. The sky was a pale, fragile gray. Kaelen moved with an easy, economical grace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He was not a man who spoke much, and Elara was grateful for the silence. It gave her time to think. They entered the Glimmerwood by midday. The name was a lie. There was no glimmer here. The trees were ancient and overgrown, their thick canopy blocking out most of the sun. The air was damp and heavy, and strange sounds echoed in the gloom. The snap of a twig, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. Elara, who could navigate by the stars or the angle of the sun, felt utterly lost. The thick clouds and dense foliage made her usual methods useless. After hours of walking, Kaelen stopped. We have a choice, he said, pointing to two diverging paths. The left path is shorter, but it runs closer to the Shadowfen, where bog lurkers hunt. The right is longer, a day's extra travel, but safer. Now, Elara's heart pounded. A day's delay could mean the sorcerer, Malakor, might catch up to them. She needed the fastest route. She needed to be sure. Without thinking, she reached for the compass. Show me the safest, fastest way, she desired. The needle pointed decisively down the left-hand path. The left path is fine, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Kaelen raised an eyebrow. How can you be so sure? I have a good sense of direction, she mumbled. He shrugged and took the path she had chosen. The air grew colder and wetter. A foul, swampy smell filled their nostrils. They walked for an hour in tense silence. Then, from the murky pools of water beside the path, 3 figures emerged. They were bog lurkers. Taller than a man, they were made of mud, tangled roots, and slime. Their eyes glowed with a pale, phosphorescent light. With a gurgling roar, they lunged. Kaelen moved with blinding speed. He drew his sword, its steel a flash of silver in the gloom. He met the first creature's attack, his blade sinking deep into its muddy torso. He sidestepped the second, kicking its legs out from under it. Elara was frozen with terror. One of the creatures turned its glowing eyes on her and charged. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. But it never came. She opened her eyes to see Kaelen standing over the creature's dissolving form, his chest heaving. He was covered in mud and slime, but he was unharmed. He turned to look at her, his expression hard. "A good sense of direction," you said. Shame and fear washed over Elara. I thought, you thought wrong," he cut her off. "From now on, I make the decisions about the path we take." They made camp an hour later. As Kaelen started a fire, Elara sat huddled by a tree, shaken. She took out the compass, its smooth surface now feeling sinister. It had shown her the fastest path, but not the safest. Or perhaps it had shown her exactly what she desired, without any regard for the consequences. As she stared at the strange symbols, she felt that peculiar emptiness again, stronger this time. She tried to remember the name of the constellations she used to chart the northern seas on her maps. For a terrifying moment, her mind was a complete blank. The names were gone, erased. Then, slowly, they trickled back. But the momentary lapse frightened her deeply. The compass was not just a guide. It was a thief, stealing little pieces of her to pay for its magic. And she had a long, long way to go. The journey through the Dragon's Tooth Mountains was a brutal trial of endurance. The path was a narrow, winding ledge on the side of a cliff, and a relentless, icy wind threatened to tear them from their footing. The world was reduced to gray rock, white snow, and the vast, terrifying emptiness of the sky above and the valley below. Elara's confidence in her own skills was shattered. In the forest, she had been disoriented. Here, in this stark, featureless landscape, she felt completely incompetent. Every decision felt like a choice between life and death. Fear became her constant companion. And so, she turned to the only thing that offered certainty. She began to consult the compass for everything. Where is the safest place to shelter from the wind? Where can we find clean water? Which path is less likely to have a rock slide? Each time the obsidian needle would spin and provide an answer. And each time, it took its payment. The thefts were subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. She would forget the exact recipe for the ink Valerius had taught her to make. She would struggle to recall a specific knot for securing their tent. Small details from her life in Silverstream became fuzzy and indistinct, like a map left out in the rain. Her own ambitions, the dreams she'd had of becoming a great cartographer, began to feel distant and unimportant. All that mattered was the next step, the next instruction from the compass. Kaelen watched her with growing concern. He saw the way she would secretly consult the object in her pocket, the glassy look in her eyes after she did so. He saw her becoming more hesitant, more dependent. "You're relying on that trinket of yours too much," she said one evening as they huddled around a small, sputtering fire in the shelter of an overhanging rock. "It helps us," Elara replied defensively, her voice sharp. "It's kept us alive." "It's making you weak," he countered, his voice low and serious. "I've seen magic like this before. It gives with one hand and takes with the other. What is it costing you, Elara?" "It costs nothing," she snapped. "Doesn't it?" he pressed. "Tell me about the first map you ever drew. Tell me every detail." "Now?" Elara opened her mouth to answer, to describe the childishly drawn map of her neighborhood she had made when she was 6. She could remember making it, but the image itself was gone from her mind. A blank space where a cherished memory should have been. A cold dread crept up her spine. Seeing the look on her face, Kaelen's expression softened slightly. "I was a soldier once," he said, staring into the flames, "serving a lord who possessed a magical sword. It was called Victory's Edge. It was said it could never be defeated in battle. And it was true. Our lord won every skirmish, every battle. We all thought he was invincible. Nanjeli." He paused, his jaw tight, but the sword fed on his will. With every victory, he became more arrogant, more reckless. He stopped listening to his advisors. He stopped caring about his men. The sword was all that mattered. In the end, it led him to challenge an army 10 times our size. He charged in, confident the sword would protect him. He was cut down before he even reached their lines. The sword's magic made him a great warrior, but it cost him his wisdom, his humanity. It cost him everything. Me. He looked at Elara, his slate-gray eyes filled with a sad understanding. Be careful, Elara. Whatever that thing is promising you, the price is always higher than you think. Many. His words scared her. She wanted to throw the compass away, to hurl it off the cliff into the valley below. But the thought of being without it, of having to rely only on her own frayed nerves and forgotten skills, was even more terrifying. The compass was a poison, but it was also the only medicine she thought she had. 2 days later, the compass guided them into a narrow canyon. At the end of it, nestled in a hollow, were the ruins of an old mountain outpost. We can shelter here for the night, Elara said, the words of the compass echoing in her mind. As they entered the crumbling stone courtyard, the heavy gates slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. They were not men, but constructs of stone and rusted metal, animated by a malevolent green energy. Their limbs creaked and groaned as they advanced, their eyes glowing with the same sickly light Elara had seen in her master's workshop. It was a trap. Malakor, she whispered in horror. Kaelen drew his sword. Stay behind me. There were too many of them. Kaelen fought with grim determination, his blade ringing against stone and metal, but for everyone he struck down, 2 more took its place. One of the larger constructs, a golem of granite, swiped at him, sending him flying across the courtyard. He landed hard, his sword clattering on the flagstone. The golem advanced on him. Desperate, Elara ripped the compass from her pocket. She held it high, her mind screaming with a single, all-consuming desire. I want it to be defeated. I want us to be safe. The compass grew incredibly hot in her hand, searing her palm. The world seemed to fade away, replaced by a vision. She saw the golem not as a solid mass of rock, but as a web of magical energies. And in the center of its chest, she saw a single, pulsating keystone, the source of its animation. Kaelen, the stone in its chest. Strike the stone, she screamed. Kaelen, struggling to his feet, saw the glowing stone she was pointing to. He lunged, grabbing a fallen spear, and with a final desperate effort, plunged it into the golem's chest. There was a deafening crack. The green light in the golem's eyes died, and it crumbled into a pile of rubble. The other constructs, their power source severed, froze in place and then fell apart. Silence descended on the ruined courtyard. Kaelen rushed to her side. Elara, are you all right? She was staring into the distance, her eyes wide with shock. The vision, the power, it had been intoxicating. But the cost had been devastating. She tried to picture Master Valerius's face, to hold on to the image of the kind, smiling man who had raised her. But the details were gone. She could remember his name, his voice, but his face was a blur, a smudge in her memory. She had traded a piece of the very person she was trying to save for a moment of power. She began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs of despair. She was no longer saving her master. She was losing him piece by piece with every step she took. The final ascent to Malakor's fortress was made in grim silence. The fortress itself was a violation of nature, a jagged spire of black, volcanic rock that clawed at the sky. It looked like a poisoned tooth growing from the mountain's peak. A foul, magical energy pulsed from it, making the air feel thin and cold. Elara had not used the compass since the ruins. Kaelen's story and the loss of her master's face had terrified her into resistance. But the withdrawal was agony. Her own thoughts felt slow and clumsy. Without the compass's clear, simple directions, every choice was fraught with uncertainty. She felt naked, vulnerable, and stupid. The desire to reach for its comforting weight, to ask it for guidance one more time, was a constant, gnawing hunger. Kaelen saw her struggle. "You're a cartographer, Elara," he said gently as they paused, looking up at the fortress. "You know how to read the land. You know about angles and structures and weak points. Trust yourself. You are more than that thing. You know." His words were a small spark in her internal darkness. A cartographer. That's who she was. She had spent years studying, learning, drawing. The knowledge was still there, buried under the magical fog of the compass. She had to find it. They found a concealed entrance, a narrow fissure in the rock face, by observing the flight patterns of strange bat-like creatures that served as the tower's sentinels. Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of winding stairs and cold, echoing chambers. The air hummed with power. Using her knowledge of architecture and her instincts as a mapmaker, Elara began to build a mental map of the fortress. She noted the direction of the corridors, the placement of the support beams, the way sound traveled through the stone. Slowly, painfully, she began to trust her own mind again. They descended into the dungeons, and there, in a cage infused with green magical bars, was Master Valerius. He was pale and thin, but his eyes lit up with a fierce protective fire when he saw Elara. "Elara, you shouldn't have come. It's you he wants." Before she could answer, a cold laugh echoed from the shadows. Malakor emerged. He was no longer a hooded figure, but a man with a sharp, intelligent face, cruel eyes, and an aura of immense power. He looked at Elara not with anger, but with a disturbing sense of ownership. "So, the little bird has finally come home to its cage," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Did you enjoy my gift, the Wayfinder? What do you want with me?" Elara demanded, her voice shaking. "The compass, the Wayfinder, as I call it, was never just a tool for navigation," Malakor explained, circling them like a predator. "It is a key. It doesn't just show you what you desire. It amplifies that desire, making it your entire world. And with every use it hollows you out, scooping out your memories, your personality, your very soul, to make room." "No." He smiled, a terrible, triumphant expression. "Make room for what, you ask?" "For me. I am old, Elara. This body grows weak. I designed the Wayfinder to find me a new host. Someone young, with a strong will, but also with a great, desperate desire that could be exploited. Your love for this old man was the perfect lure. It has brought you to me, empty and ready to be filled." Horror, cold and absolute, washed over Elara. This was his plan all along. She was not the master of the compass. She had been its ultimate victim. Malakor raised his hands, and green energy crackled around him. "Now, give me the compass, and let us complete the transfer." Every instinct in her screamed to use it, to hold the compass and desire his death with all her might. The power she had felt in the ruins, the power to defeat a stone golem. Surely it could defeat one man. She could feel the compass in her pocket, warm and pulsing, calling to her. It was the easy way, the certain way. "Elara, don't!" Valerius cried from his cage. "Fight him. Be the mapmaker I taught you to be." "He's right," Kaelen shouted, placing himself between Elara and the sorcerer, sword at the ready. "Your mind is your own. Use it." Their words cut through the siren song of the compass. Her mind, her knowledge. She wasn't an empty vessel. She was a cartographer. She looked around the cavernous dungeon, her eyes not seeing a wizard's lair, but a structure. A building with stresses and loads and points of failure. The ceiling was a high, vaulted arch, and directly above Malakor was a massive, ornate chandelier held by a single thick chain. That chain was anchored to a large keystone in the ceiling. A keystone that looked unstable. Her years of studying architectural drawings for her maps suddenly came into sharp focus. "Kaelen!" she yelled, her voice clear and strong, free of the compass's influence for the first time in weeks. "The chain. Above him. The keystone holding it has a fracture. I saw it in a drawing once. If you can hit that exact spot, its integrity will fail." Malakor laughed. "A clever observation, but he will never reach it." He flung a bolt of green energy at Kaelen, who barely managed to deflect it with his sword. But Elara had seen something else. A pile of discarded shields and armor. "Kaelen, your dagger?" He understood instantly. Without hesitation, he tossed his long, perfectly balanced dagger to her. Elara grabbed a round shield. She was no warrior, but she knew angles. She knew geometry. She knew trajectories. As Kaelen kept Malakor occupied, she positioned herself. She calculated the angle of reflection, the force needed. She held her breath, her mind a perfect, clear map of the action she was about to take. This was her true desire. Not a wish given to a magical object, but a choice, made with her own skill and will. She threw the dagger. It flew straight and true, striking the shield Kaelen had just raised. It ricocheted perfectly, a blur of spinning steel, and slammed into the fractured keystone high above. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a spiderweb of cracks appeared in the ceiling. With a groan of tortured stone, the keystone gave way. The massive chain snapped, and the chandelier, a ton of iron and crystal, plummeted downwards. Malakor looked up, his arrogant expression turning to one of pure terror. He had time for a single, strangled cry before he was crushed beneath it. The impact shook the entire fortress. The magical bars of Valerius's cage flickered and died. Kaelen rushed to help him out as the ceiling began to crumble around them. "We have to go. Now!" Kaelen yelled. Elara ran with them. As she passed the spot where Malakor had fallen, she saw something glittering in the rubble. It was the compass, its wooden case shattered, the obsidian needle broken in two. Its light was gone. It was just a piece of dead wood. She didn't even give it a second glance. She was already focused on mapping their path out of the collapsing tower, using the one tool that would never fail her again, her own mind. The journey back down the Dragon's Tooth Mountains was even more difficult than the journey up. But for Elara, it was a pilgrimage of rediscovery. Without the compass, the world felt loud and vibrant again. She had to pay attention to the crunch of snow under her boots, the direction of the wind, the position of the pale winter sun. At night she would stare up at the sky, and slowly, like old friends returning from a long journey, the names of the stars and constellations came back to her. She was no longer following a single magical line. She was navigating a complex, beautiful, and sometimes frightening world, and the experience was exhilarating. Kaelen walked beside her, no longer a suspicious guard but a companion. He taught her how to track animals, how to predict the weather from the clouds, and how to find true north using the sun and a stick. He was sharing his knowledge, and in return, she shared hers, explaining the principles of triangulation and the geological formations that shaped the mountains around them. Valerius, though weak, was recovering quickly. He walked with Kaelen's support, his eyes filled with a profound pride as he watched Elara. "I knew you had it in you, my dear," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Your strength was never in that cursed object. It was always in your own curiosity, your own intelligence." Then Mal. He confessed that he had taken the compass from Malakor's old laboratory years ago, hoping to study and dismantle it, but the sorcerer had tracked him down before he could unlock its secrets. You did what I could not. You defeated it not with magic but with will. Nay. When they finally reached the edge of the Glimmerwood and saw the familiar rolling hills of the Heartlands, Elara felt a sense of homecoming that was deeper than she had ever known. She had left as a frightened apprentice. She was returning as a seasoned traveler, a survivor. They arrived in Silverstream on a bright, cold morning. The city was unchanged, its canals still reflecting the sky, its air still smelling of bread and water. But Elara was different. She saw it not just as her home, but as a point on a much larger map, a map that she now felt ready to explore. At the workshop, Kaelen hesitated at the door. "Well," he said gruffly, "this is where we part ways. A deal's a deal." Elara looked at the money pouch she had prepared for him, the full payment they had agreed upon. Then she looked at the man who had saved her life and helped her find herself again. "Or," she said, a small smile playing on her lips, "you could stay. The workshop could use a good guard. And I suspect there are many parts of this kingdom that haven't been properly mapped yet. I might need an escort for future expeditions." Nagasarwach. A slow smile spread across Kaelen's weathered face. "I might be persuaded to stick around. For the right price, of course." But his eyes held a warmth she had never seen in them before. Weeks later, the workshop was once again filled with the scent of paper and ink. Valerius, now retired, would sit by the window, offering advice and telling stories. Elara stood at the main desk, the same desk where her journey had begun. But she was not looking at someone else's work. Before her was a large blank sheet of the finest vellum. She picked up her quill, dipped it in a pot of freshly made ink, a recipe she now remembered perfectly, and began to draw. She started not with a coastline or a mountain range, but with a single winding path. It was a map of her own journey, drawn not from magic or desire, but from memory, skill, and a heart that now knew its own direction. Her hand was steady, and the line she drew was strong and clear. She had a whole world to map, and she was finally ready to begin.